Mastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So we continue from where we left. With the discussion was on the location of the self in the physical body. What exactly is this self? And from different points of view, from different sciences as they discuss it, it's a multidisciplinary approach to explore the science of human possibilities. Though it is briefly described as Vedanta, but Vedanta, if you see in depth, if you study Vedanta, it is nothing but exploring all the different possibilities that a human being can possibly explore in his own life. The physical possibilities, the mental possibilities, the other emotional possibilities. So there are different levels of consciousness at which human beings interact with the world. And that opens up a lot of possibilities. So the science of Vedanta is nothing but a science of exploring all the possibilities without leaving out anything unexplored. So that is what our subject is all about. Because we find that there is a lot to a human being, to the human personality, than his physical and mental capabilities. There are certain sensitivities which we can say, emotional sensitivities, emotional nature. They have, there are many times we will find exceptionally unselfish people with lot of unselfishness. So to explore what motivates them to do it, as against people who are extremely selfish and self-interest is the main pursuit in their life. So how to account for these different possibilities? Why some people are very much more unselfish or maybe more humanitarian than other people, and some people are extremely opposite, and their own self-interest is the only thing that really matters to them. So this can be explained, Vedanta says, because some of them have not stopped at their physical possibilities. The physical possibilities have given them good health, maybe a good physique, and mental possibilities which they explored. They have developed certain skills which enable them to earn a living and also do well intellectually in the academic career as well as in the professional life that follows. And they obviously, that is the goal for most of the people, and they're happy with that till some calamity comes, and then they feel that these two things are not sufficient. There's some higher possibility which perhaps they feel they have not explored. So then they come to spirituality, and then they find that there are other possibilities which our scriptures so wisely have listed. And they have just asked you to approach this subject. I mean, the Upanishads and the Vedanta is asked you to approach the subject as a scientist would approach his own subject of physical sciences, whether it is physics, chemistry. That search for truth is the same. Only thing, the instruments that he uses and the goals that he sets to achieve are different. So physics has a particular goal in mind, chemistry has a particular goal in mind, mathematics has its own, mathematics opens up its own possibilities. We have this AI, logic, and so many things, artificial intelligence. Every science wants to improve upon itself, whatever it has discovered till now, in the search for truth. And when they find that there are better ways to do certain things and higher things that can be achieved, then we call it progress in science. So also in the spiritual field, these Upanishads say that one should not stop. One should keep on exploring in a very scientific spirit, with a very scientific spirit, in a very scientific manner. One has to keep exploring till all the possibilities are covered. So that is what our quest is all about. So we try to find, as the Upanishadic sages and rishis did, to find what is this thing known as self. What makes us do all these things? Is there some entity in our personality which is the self? Of course, there is a self. We cannot ignore the self. If it is happiness, it is for the self. If it is unhappiness, I am unhappy because something within which I consider to be myself is unhappy. I'm not bothered if somebody else is unhappy because that is not myself. That is not what I think is myself, my own self. So it doesn't matter. My toothache may be more painful for me than somebody else's accident or some big mishap, because I don't feel that, whereas I feel my toothache. So in the quest to find this self within, which feels the pain, which feels the suffering, that was the quest after which Buddha went. Buddha also wanted to know what is the entity that suffers. Whether it is the mind, if the mind is the entity that suffers, is the body only which suffers, or is it both a combination of body and mind that suffers? So that was the quest. That was his quest. And he found his own solution, and he got the concept of nirvana and the steps that lead to nirvana. So also, the Upanishads also say that if we embark upon a quest to find out the root cause of all our suffering and root cause of all the problems that we face in life, then we have to explore all the possibilities. It's not just physical suffering that we suffer from. We have medicine, we have advances in medicine to take care of that. You go to the doctor, maybe he tries his best. There's so many advances in medicine which can take care of that. Or maybe you go to a psychiatrist. If there are mental issues, maybe you can solve it or at least address them at a certain level, but then still it persists. There are certain basic existential problems. So that was the quest, certain basic existential problem like fear of death, fear of uncertainty, which is one of the most unsolved problems of human life. No matter how much we are well equipped with our skills, with our health, with our advances in science, nobody is certain about many things in his or her own life. So that uncertainty continues to plague our human minds, and that is one of the reasons of suffering. All the fears, anxieties about things that may not happen in our life, but still we are anxious about it, is because of this uncertainty. And we discussed last time that physics also came to that dead end. When Heisenberg went too deep into the subatomic world, and they found that it is very difficult to determine the position and velocity of a subatomic particle at a particular point of time. He calls it the uncertainty principle. But that is for the gross universe. Perhaps the gross Newtonian universe, we see things are happening in a very certain way. We can predict the effect of certain causes will lead to certain effects. They are predictable. But as you go deeper, as you go finer into the subatomic world, this uncertainty starts creeping in. And then people are at a loss to define or formulate certain laws which can explain this chaos. There seems to be no order when you see in then still at the microcosmic level, we find there's so much of order. But when you say, or when you try to claim that there is order in this universe, you suddenly find human minds. There are these wars, there are sudden changes in the human society, in the human minds, which lead to a lot of turmoil, mental, physical, and so many things you see around you. Many things which were not predicted. Of course, everybody thinks that the life will go on with the advances in science. Everything will be more peaceful, more easy to handle. People's lifespan will increase. But it doesn't, if the lifespan increases because of medical research, but at the same time, lives are cut short by people not able to control their ambitions, their power, and due to all the violence and wars that are taking place. So, the solutions continue to elude us. And that is why in the Upanishads, they found that the search after the indwelling self, they call it the Atma, whether you call it Jivatma or Paramatma or Brahman, it doesn't matter, they are different names. When you try to analyze who is this self for whom this suffering really matters. So according to the Upanishads, now we discussed it in a very broad and scientific way. Now let us come to some basic Upanishadic verses, because that is the goal of our discussion here, where we will quote from the different Upanishads what is their opinion about it. Then there can be analysis based on what they say. It is something like scientists first lay down the postulate or some hypothesis, and then finally this hypothesis has to be proved, experimentally verified multiple times in different locations and by different people. When it is seen to produce the same results, we get a theory, so-called theory, which is an established fact. It is no longer a hypothesis. So here we will, for people who have not realized, for people who are reading Upanishads or Vedanta for the first time, these may be something like hypothesis. Said, how do you know? Just because Chandogya Upanishad or some other Shankaracharya or somebody makes some statement, is it verifiable? As we can do in the case of science, somebody proposes a hypothesis, we can go to the lab, we can go do experiments, whatever experiments are necessary, and then find out if these things are verifiable in a real life situation. So also here, the Upanishads and the Rishis don't tell us that you accept us that these hypotheses, if you think it is a hypothesis, you don't have to take us at face value. You experiment, you follow it to your logical conclusion, and then try to see if these things are true. Then you can say these verses or these Upanishadic verses are like theories which are established. So the Chandogya Upanishad, as we discussed last time, calls the physical body as the Brahmapuram. So Brahmapuram is a Sanskrit word where Brahman resides. Now that is their way of figuratively explaining things. We don't have to take it literally because there is no abode for Brahman. He is all pervading, or he or it. We normally don't attribute a gender to Brahman. So because it is beyond all genders, it's beyond the beyond the masculine or feminine. So Brahman is often referred to it in English as it. So the city of Brahman. Now that is a figurative way of explaining. All these Upanishad verses, we have to take it and go into what it really means. City of Brahman means the place where we experience Brahman in our own bodies. So without a body, there is no question of realizing Brahman or experiencing the oneness with Brahman, because we are that. That is what Raman Maharshi and all say, that why do you bother about all these things? But that is a very difficult path where you just focus or try to realize that self which is within, just go, it's a kind of direct self-inquiry, while which you negate everything that is not the self, and then you come face to face or become one with that self. But here we are following a much gradual path, because we imagine to begin with that Brahman is some entity which resides in a city which is compared to our body. So imagine Brahman dwells here as the internal ruler. That's the lower conception of Brahman to begin with. That's how Upanishads take you step by step, because that is the only thing we understand. We can understand a city or a kingdom with a ruler, who is the one who controls that kingdom. So also with a retinue of attendants and servants and soldiers and all those things. So this retinue, or maybe the people who assist the king to run this kingdom, has been compared to the 10 organs which enable us to be in touch with the world outside. And one of the organs is the mind. According to some schools of Vedanta, mind is also an organ. It is just like we have eyes, we have a nose, we have smell, we have ears through which we hear. So these are all supports to the inner self, or the antaryami, who controls. There is a point where everything, the things that you hear, the things that you smell, the things that you even think, matters to you at a particular spot. So now Upanishads are concerned about that location. Where do we get that unified experience of the self? Who is the one who sees all these things? Who is within me? That was the experiment these people did, and they tried to find out the location of the self in the body. Because where do I feel? Normally it is easy to say when you say, or when you point to some experience, you just naturally your hand goes towards the heart. When you say somewhere near the heart, not the physical heart, but the center of your being, you just say I. When you say, nobody taught us, but even the child, when he grows, when he wants to say something, he points to his own heart. So there is some subtle reason why he does that. That is why in the Chandogya Upanishad, they say the abode of Brahman, or maybe that self, as it were, is the heart center. Heart center, which is the center of consciousness. Obviously, it is along the spinal cord, because the spinal cord is from where all the nerves branch out. And if you see medically also, certain parts of the body are controlled by certain parts of the spinal cord. The lower parts possibly control the lower limbs. As we go up, when we come to the heart, there is some unifying center in the spinal cord where there's a group of nerves that merge together, and we get that experience of the indweller self, which feels that this is the body. When somebody hits you, or you get some physical blow, you feel it there. I mean, that unified experience is felt there. So it is known as, figuratively again, the lotus of the heart. So since God is immanent in the universe, but he is specifically felt, the Brahman is specifically, or the self, which is all pervading. The Upanishads will come to that, but we don't see ourselves as all pervading. We don't feel ourselves in all other bodies, in all other objects around us. Though sometimes when we see some wonderful landscape or something, we may get a feeling that we are one with that. We may forget our pains, forget ourselves, and imagine that we are part of this great nature. That is different, but those are occasional glimpses of the self. But this immanent the self, the supreme self, which is immanent in the universe, which is there percolating, or which is all pervading in the universe, this non-dual Brahman, which is pure consciousness, its nature is pure consciousness, as one of the Mahavakyas of Upanishad say, Prajnanam Brahma. So that consciousness a reflection of which is our consciousness, a small reflection. We are conscious of sound, we are conscious of through our organ, we are conscious of the presence of heat, light through our eyes, and many things. We can see visual objects. So all these consciousnesses, partial consciousness, are unified in the self. So the pure consciousness, they imagined, or they proposed a theory or proposed a hypothesis, which they obviously their own experience proved its truth, that the consciousness of all our little consciousness is the Brahmapura, the heart center, which is the seat of a higher faculty of the mind known as Buddhi. So he's all pervading because he's Purusha. The word Purusha itself means, Purusha or Brahman, means he's all pervading. But then how do you feel? Why do you feel it in the heart? So that is the explanation. His direct manifestation, whatever is the manifestation in the phenomenal world around us, and is felt as the innermost self of the individual. So it is known as Antaryami. It is shining within us as a central principle of consciousness. That is what our Vedantic rishis or the Upanishadic rishis discovered, that this inner consciousness, the principle of consciousness that is in us, can be experienced in the depth of the spiritual heart, not the physical heart. So, whatever expressions this consciousness shows on the surface is just a reflection. This is a very important point. Not that it is independent, it is a reflection. Like they give the example of the sun. When there is a sun, and you have 100 pots open, big pots with large mouths, and there's water in each one of the pots, and somebody looking at the pots, he will see 10 different suns. They say there are 10 pots. The reflection of the sun is seen there. It's not the sun, but the light that comes out of that reflection appears to be 10, though there is only one sun. So similarly, they give the example that it is that pure consciousness which is percolating through our sense organs as sight, as sound, as smell, as many other things which we perceive. And we call that person is conscious. He is obviously, one of the definition of consciousness is that he reacts to external stimuli, whether it is a plant or even an animal or a human being. So if there is a reaction, there is an action from, or there is an input from objects outside, there is an output or there is some reaction to that. Action follows, a reaction follows. So that reactions, they can be multiple, simultaneous. We hear, we see sounds at the same time, and there are multiple reactions to the stimulus that we get from the world outside. But where do we feel it? The common point, Upanishad says, is the spiritual principle of consciousness in the center of the heart, the depth of the heart, which is known as Buddhi. That's also a technical word. This Buddhi is an extremely technical word because the whole science of consciousness is depending, science or the sadhana, the steps that we take to realize this consciousness is through development of the Buddhi. Buddhi is not just intellect. In a common vernacular language, when you say you don't have Buddhi, you really superficially you mean you don't have intelligence. But that intelligence is a skill. It is an academic skill that you develop. It has nothing to do with the spiritual Buddhi. Spiritual Buddhi is something that enables you to be in touch with that supreme consciousness, as opposed to your identification with the ordinary little consciousness that you see. You see a object and then you react in a particular way, either out of fear, you go against it, or maybe you are happy to see an object that you like, or a person who is coming to you. So you react in different ways, and then you say you are conscious of the presence of either fire or some danger, or you're conscious of the presence of something soothing. So you are conscious of many things in life. But what is the consciousness that gives this? What is the ultimate consciousness? That was the quest in the Upanishads, that what is that consciousness which is seen as reflected consciousness in the small things that we do. So the whole psychophysical system of a human being is a reflection of this supreme consciousness or self. So Shankaracharya, as I told you, we have to go accept these statements as different hypotheses, and we have to try to find out how far they are true from our own experience. So Shankaracharya, in his commentary on the Taittiriya Upanishad is also another Upanishad among all the different Upanishads, which give a complete idea of all the spiritual possibilities of a human being. Other than, they don't focus more on physical and intellectual, because they thought it is a secular knowledge. They left it to the schools and colleges of Gurukulas in those days. Say, we don't teach all those things. That is meant for earning a living, the skills that one needs to, a student needs to enable to earn a living and live a life, a decent life in the world. That is not part of the Upanishads. They focused on higher things. They expected these things to be taught in the primary school or in the school, and they focused on this specialization, if you can call it, where they try to find out, go to the root of the problems which a human being encounters, which is not addressed by our schooling system. So that's why these questions are asked. As we do ask questions, there are problems in mathematics which the student is supposed to solve, and that is how he learns. So here also, Shankaracharya comments upon certain Upanishads, because he knows that the Sanskrit language and the terms that are used in the Upanishads are extremely difficult to understand. They are very cryptic statements, and it needs a lot of explanation to understand what it really means. So, in Taittiriya Upanishad, there is a commentary in a small explanation given of the 6th verse in the first chapter of Taittiriya Upanishad, where Shankaracharya says, he says, the heart is a lump of flesh shaped like a lotus bud facing downwards with the stalk upwards, in which are apertures for numerous arteries. It is the receptacle of life and is familiar, being observed when the body is dissected. So now he is talking of the physical heart, which obviously is connected to our circulation system and also connected to the nervous system, because unless the heart receives the signals from the spinal cord and gets its nervous impulses, the heart will not beat. You see, all these pranas are connected. They found it long before medical research had advanced, because we know that when the heart is not capable to pump the blood, we have pacemakers which stimulate the nervous signals, which the nervous system does normally in us, where the signals go to the heart and tells it how to beat, and once it starts beating, it has to last for the whole lifetime. So you can imagine how much of nervous energy is expended just to regulate our beating of the heart. So he's saying that the medical research, whatever was done in those days, a lump of flesh, the heart, which looks like a lotus bud, there is nothing lotus about it. So the lotus bud facing downward, if you see the heart shape of the heart, with its stalk upwards, all the veins and the arteries that go out of the heart. So it's like an inverted bud, if you visualize the heart. and in which are apertures for numerous arteries. Of course, that is very well observed. So the heart is a lump of flesh, as Shankaracharya so beautifully explains, which is like a lotus bud facing downwards, and the stalk is upwards. So he gives a pretty good idea of what the apertures are, the heart, the apertures of the numerous arteries. It is the receptacle of life and is familiar being observed when the body is dissected. That means the dissected body, the physicians like Charaka and Sushruta and all those things, they obviously dissected. They did not just base their ideas. The whole science of Ayurveda was not based, or even the surgery that they did, was not based on hearsay. They had dissected. And a young person like Shankaracharya, who had obviously no medical background, also speaks of this from a medical point of view. Though that is not what is the Upanishads really mean. So when the Upanishads say, when they talk of the heart and when they talk of anatomy, they just give a glimpse of how the body and mind and the spirit or the experience of this consciousness is connected. It may be a reflected consciousness. We say the body is conscious. We say the human being is conscious because his heart is pumping. But even if the heart stops pumping, the person is still not brain dead. He has to be brain dead. But even then, there is so much of uncertainty. Nobody can define, in spite of all the research. There are instances where a person has been pronounced as dead, biologically dead, but he comes back to life. And then there are cases where people have been suing the doctor, say that how could you declare? So the very conception of consciousness in the physical body itself is so uncertain. So leave alone, if you go further down, Shankaracharya and all, they knew when they commented upon this Taittiriya Upanishad. There are various references to this seat of consciousness. So each Upanishad gives a wonderful picture of the experience that they felt at different levels of consciousness. You should always remember that in every medical system also, the way the treatment is done, way the diagnosis is done, like homeopathy, we have allopathy, we have Ayurvedic, they're totally different systems. But you can't say only one system works. Every system works. So also in this Upanishads, Taittiriya Upanishad will say something. They'll give one example. Whereas in this Upanishad, in the Kathopanishad, you will find the different idea of this self, the consciousness that is within us, which is captured in, or you may say, which is imprisoned in the body-mind complex. We are speaking of that self within, not of the supreme self, which has been captured in this tiny little body and mind. So the more we understand about that, the more we explore our possibilities. We, human being, with all the progress that human beings in the external world, especially in the understanding human nature, has done, in spite of that, very little, very, very little, in spite of so many books, if you just Google the very word consciousness, you will find hundreds of books from different disciplines. A neurologist will try to explain consciousness in his own way. A psychiatrist or a philosopher will say this is consciousness. And very often, the ideas differ from each other. So there are so many books which are based on consciousness studies. And nobody can claim, even I'm saying the Upanishads do not claim that theirs is the final word. This we have to remember, because people are so certain and they claim to say, or they claim that this Upanishad says the final word, or that Upanishad gives the final word. Upanishads never will say that. They were so humble that they said, Charai Veti, go on, go forward. We have discovered up to this point, we don't say that human beings can't go on the moon. There was a time when people thought it is blasphemy. How can you ever reach the moon? But a real scientist will say, no, maybe I can't go, I can't do these things. Somebody in the future will do it. So also here, we have to take all these teachings at different levels of consciousness. That is what Shankaracharya is trying to say, or we can say that is what is being explained here. That these different Upanishadic statements, somebody saying that it is heart is like a lump of flesh. This is Shankara's commentary. With a like a lotus bud, you can see the heart is actually of that shape, facing downwards with the stalk upwards, in which there are apertures for numerous arteries. It is the receptacle of life. He was not wrong when he said that. For majority of us, when the heart stops, our consciousness stops. It's a common experience. Of course, it can be revived. It can be, now they have discovered the heart-lung machine where you can even keep the person alive. And we do not know when the consciousness again comes back. There may be a possibility that after many years, they may replace the heart, they may do so many things. So definitely consciousness is not in the physical heart. Otherwise, how would we revive a person who is on a machine, a heart-lung machine? He is there for a month together, and then suddenly we put a new heart, and from where does this consciousness come back to that person? He can live for many years. Some people have lived for several years with a borrowed heart. So here, not that he's telling the final word, he says it is the receptacle of life and is familiar. See, he has used very cleverly this word. Because you and I cannot go beyond this, he's telling that you are in the kindergarten level, or maybe you are in the high school level, but this is not a PhD for a PhD student in spirituality. For familiar people who are familiar with lower ideas, you can consider this heart, which you can observe when the body is dissected. So you see, Shankaracharya very clearly says, this is what you normally understand as consciousness. It is fine, because that is also true at your level. Because as a matter of familiar experience, whenever the heart fails or the heart person dies of a heart attack, you say there is no consciousness. But does really the consciousness go away? Where does it go away? Where is its location? Now, we take another Upanishad, a slightly higher concept. Just as in older days, they believed that once the heart stops, there's no scope. But now doctors say, no, we can keep him alive and then maybe put a different heart or even revive the same heart. It may start. There's so much of uncertainty in the medical research. So also now there is another explanation based on another Rishi's experience. He is perhaps a specialist. So we have to consider all these ideas of consciousness before we can try to find out at what level all the possibilities are exhausted. Definitely, if we believe in Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy, which Swami Vivekananda himself said, goes far beyond that of the Vedas and Vedanta. He said that Sri Ramakrishna's experiences go far beyond the experience, that which is recorded in the Vedas and Vedanta. You have to remember one thing, Vyasa was the one who compiled these 4 Vedas. We do not know for certain how many of the Vedic texts have been lost. I am talking of those Upanishads which have been recovered, thanks to Shankaracharya. That's a small part of the actual knowledge that was there as an oral tradition and also written tradition. Unfortunately, invaders came and destroyed. But whatever was recovered, that itself is a vast literature. So we cannot say that these things that were higher ideas were not present. So that is why the ideas that appear to us in the Upanishads, now we are restricting to that, to the Upanishads that are available to us. And each Upanishad gives a different views. One need not be confused because at each level it is true. Swamiji explained it in his Chicago lectures. In one of the papers on Hinduism which he delivered, very clearly said, the Hindu believes that we are traveling from lower truth to higher truth. It is just like you observe a sun from a certain distance, it looks big, it looks small. But as you go nearer and nearer, you will find that the sun, the size, definitely if you go with the help of a rocket as far as you can, then you will find a bigger sun. More details can be seen. So also Hindu psychology believes that whatever a scientist, a rishi, or a Upanishadic verse quotes, it's a partial explanation, or it's an explanation which is based on that rishi's experience, his or her. There are some women rishikas also. So whatever experiences they saw, they formulated it, they experienced it, so they have proof about the veracity of those experiences. But as you go to see some of the other Upanishads, you get different ideas. So one need not be confused. As some of the other religions, Semitic religions, who say your religion is so confusing. Each sect will say this is true, this is true. Of course, we have quarreled amongst us, but so have other religions done. And at least we don't say that our book is final. After this, there is no discovery possible. We don't say ours is the last discovery that was ever made, and after that, no new discovery will be accepted in religion. That would not be scientific. It would be like scientists saying that now scientific research has come to an end and you cannot discover anything better than this. That is not possible. So Hindu psychology speaks of different aspects of the mind. We are now coming to find out what that self within is. What that self within is, one thing is very clear. It is a reflection of the real self. No matter how much we go deep, it will always be our view of our own self. If I'm a selfish man, my family, my world will matter more to me than others. If I'm a more unselfish man, his same self, the same person, after 10 years, 20 years, his self is identified with a large number of people. That means his self has expanded. He is expanded to such an extent that it encompasses, it expands to embrace the whole world. So that was possible in the case of people like Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda, because we see in their lives and certain stages of their life, they could even physically feel if somebody was slapped far off. We never have that kind of experience. And as I said, our toothache matters to us more than some great wound to some other person, because we are not feeling. We may sympathize with that person. He may be in the hospital, but right now I am more bothered about my toothache because myself is identified with this body, with my tooth. So who is that my, who is that I, with which we are making such a big fuss? That is what Upanishads are trying to answer. What you call your little self is nothing but a reflection of that self on the ego. So that is why when we come to the two aspects of the mind, when we even try to think of the human possibilities, the different human possibilities, that is how we define Upanishads, the study of Upanishads as. Why is it a science of human possibilities? Because Upanishads never claim that they have explored all the possibilities. Even in a concept, one of the basic concepts of Upanishads, which is the discovery of the self, there are different layers or different levels of consciousness which gives different answers in different Upanishads. And they don't say this is my word is the final word. There is still scope. There are infinite possibilities to be explored. As Vivekananda said, the book of God has not ended. There are so many pages we have studied, but there are still more, the infinite number of pages still left, the book of God. What it means is the Upanishads never come to a conclusion. They say this infinite self, the real inquiry into the location of the self in the body itself is such a vast subject that every Upanishad comes out with a different answer. And there are certain points on which they agree that there are two distinct phases of the human mind. Broadly speaking, they have been classified into two. One is the manas and the buddhi, which is a very, very important distinction. Even to begin one's spiritual life, one has to attain or reach that level of the mind where one can identify more with the buddhi than the mind. So, manas is the reactive mind, as we say, or you may say it is a cognitive aspect of the mind with its two different, you may say the distinctions are not so finely defined. The borders which distinguish a deliberative mind with the determinative or the discriminative mind are not, the borders are not defined in a very conclusive way, because they just keep changing. But one thing is certain, that the reactive mind, we can call it, to understand it better, we call it a reactive mind. So the sense organs gives us all the different information that we are bombarded with, and the self reacts in a particular way. We call it the cognitive mind, or the, you may say, reactive mind. So that has been clearly distinguished in the Upanishad as the lower level of mind or lower faculty of the mind, which is known as manas. Because there are different aspects, but broadly speaking, one is the discriminative mind, another is the determinative or the buddhi, which, as I very often like to say, or maybe it is a very easy to understand if we say it is a choice-making capacity of the mind. So our life has, very often it has been emphasized that we are what we are in our life is because of the right or wrong choices that we make. Discrimination is not, discriminative mind or viveka is not a very easy thing to attain. That is why Shankaracharya had to write a whole book, compose a whole book on viveka or discrimination, which is the development of the buddhi, which is known as Viveka Chudamani, the crest jewel of discrimination, where he emphasizes, very clearly says, without this buddhi or the awakening of the buddhi, spiritual life does not begin. Forget, academically one may understand many things, the different aspects of human personality. One can even study the Upanishads and all the religious texts in the world. But here, Shankaracharya, or maybe the Upanishadic rishis, make a clear distinction between experiential knowledge, where your faculty of buddhi is awakened. So the whole Gayatri mantra, Dhiyo Yona Prachodayata, which is the essence of all the mantras. All the mantra sadhana, or all the meaning of all mantra can be compressed in this Gayatri, where the awakening of the buddhi is the first instrument that we have to explore the higher layers, or to explore the nature of the self, which has been encased or maybe imprisoned in this psychophysical system that we have. So that is what they say, this manas and the buddhi, the clear distinction is what spirituality, or that is one possibility which Vedanta, as the science of human possibilities, if we define Vedanta as the science of human possibilities, this is one human possibilities which remains unexplored. And most of the Upanishads and Vedanta as in general focuses more on the exploration, or the possibility of discovering or enhancing this capacity, possibility of enhancing this capacity of development of buddhi to the development of this manas. Because development of manas is secular knowledge. The skills that are required, the academic skills, the physical skills, and all the skills that are required to survive as a human being, or even do well, gain name and fame, many things can be acquired with the development of manas. But no development of the manas is important to the Upanishadic rishis, because they feel unless the buddhi opens, the faculty of buddhi, according to them, that is the doorway to higher spiritual experiences. So it really doesn't matter how much of the manas is developed with the help of all the information that we gather around us. And if it doesn't lead to the development of buddhi, one may be a academic giant, but he may be a spiritual pygmy. That is why Swami Vivekananda very clearly said, just to bring this point to the modern world, to emphasize this point to the modern world, Sri Ramakrishna discarded, you see, not that he avoided, he discarded all forms of formal learning to show to the world that in the purified mind of a rishi, these spiritual truths are spontaneously revealed in the buddhi of these enlightened souls. So understanding or experiencing the spiritual truths through buddhi, as opposed to understanding this thing through the manas, this is a fundamental difference that is explained here. That is what we are trying to explain. So we have explored all the human possibilities. We have explored the physical possibilities and done well in that. A lot of medical science research has gone, a lot of mental capacities, has skills, and everything has been developed. Science is always developing this manas part of it. But when it comes to the development of the buddhi, the consciousness, the levels of consciousness that open up to the human personality, that explores newer possibilities. That is exactly what the subject of this Saturday class is, alternate Saturday class. Because we want to, Upanishads say, what you have discovered till now is fine, but don't stop. Just go ahead. Charai veti, charai veti. Vedas always said, they knew there is no limit to our human knowledge, especially when you try to understand it through the mind. There's another faculty that they discovered, buddhi, which gives you intuitive knowledge, direct experience of reality as it is, uncolored by or not restricted by our manas. That is an important point. So, but still, why does Shankaracharya speak of different levels of the self? Are there many selves within us, or is there only one self? If there are many selves, why do we see different selves? Because from that vantage point, or from that point of the consciousness, we identify with that self, that limited self. But Vedas do not totally discard it. So that's fine. You are traveling from a lower truth, you go to a higher truth, you'll see another version, another possibility opening up. When you see a higher version, a higher vision of your own self, when the buddhi awakens, as Swami Brahmananda used to say, very often he used to say that after Nirvikalpa Samadhi, your spiritual experience is open. There's no end to that. It looks a very distinct possibility that we will ever, if we are to take that standard. The Brahmananji, once somebody told him that by Thakur's grace, you had the experience of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, which is supposed to be in Vedanta or yoga, a very high state, which is for one struggles one's whole life to attain that. And he says that is the beginning of the varieties of spiritual or religious experiences you can have. That is the beginning of spiritual life. So there is no end. There is a continuous discovery going on. And as Swami Vivekananda said, I saw Sri Ramakrishna always growing in ideas. I could not limit him to any particular thing. In that sense, when he says that, he says his experiences went far beyond the experiences that are recorded in the Vedas and the Upanishads, and the Vedas and the Vedanta. Here also the same thing, Shankaracharya says, for people who are familiar, the heart is like a inverted lotus bud. That doesn't mean it means the physical bud, physical heart. Though the description tallies with that. But he says, in some other places, the antakarana, the mind, is of a tiny space about the size of a thumb. Tiny space, bright little space. This is another experience of another rishi, which is equally true. And this was confirmed by Swami Adbhutananda, because he never read the Upanishads, he could hardly read or write. He had all the experiences of the descriptions of the self, from whatever level it may be. which are mentioned in the different Upanishads. And he had that experience before some scholar, Swami Shuddhanandji, was explaining it in one of the classes in Belur Math. He was reading some verse and explaining it in simple Bengali to the novices, because Swami Vivekananda had made it compulsory that there should be some scriptural class. And Latu Maharaj, when the Kathopanishad verse, where the inner self, the Pratyagatman, has been described there as something, as a luminous entity of the size of a thumb. Maybe that is the experience that Rishi had, the intuitive experience of the Rishi who composed the, who was revealed to him. But Swami Adbhutananda had seen this. So when the Pandit was explaining in an academic way, obviously Swami Shuddhananda, who was the teacher there, he was much junior to Adbhutananda, but he was a scholar, so naturally he was asked to explain. And Latu Maharaj was forced to sit in that class because Swamiji said there will be no exception. Everybody has to attend the class. And he had no need, like his master. He had all experiential knowledge of all the truths. But still he sat there. But that day, something significant happened. When Swami Shuddhanandji, Sudhir, his name was Sudhir Maharaj, he said, the Kathopanishad says, based of course on his Sanskrit knowledge, he might have explained. It's hardly, we do not know if Shuddhanandji had that experience which the Rishi speaks of. When he explained that, Latu Maharaj immediately jumped up and he said, yes, Panditji is telling the correct thing. Pandit, they used to call him Pandit lovingly. So Pandit thik bolche, and he says the right thing. And then they thought it's just out of enthusiasm, Latu Maharaj, but he could not sleep. He was so excited that my experience tallies with what the Upanishad says. So as if giving validity to his own experience. So he goes, and at midnight he goes and then wakes up Shuddhanandji. He said, what you said in the evening, absolutely, you told the right thing. I mean, he was as happy as a child who discovers something for the first time. Because he thought, as the world thought, that since he didn't go to school or since he didn't even learn the alphabet, at least Thakur knew to read and write. Swami Adbhutananda could never learn the alphabets also. So obviously that kind of a bit of inferiority complex would have been there. But then when he found that I don't need to learn from this Panditji or someone who explains the Kathopanishad, and I have these experiences even before I heard about it. So that makes a huge difference, that the intuitive knowledge which the buddhi gives, or maybe one experiences when the buddhi is awakened, is far different from the knowledge that we, deliberative knowledge or the logical knowledge or the cognitive knowledge which we get by the development of manas. So we will read about that. Upanishad also refer to the cave of the heart. We'll see what that cave means, what is the spiritual significance. Because these are not empty words, these are not just figurative explanations. These are intuitive experiences of the rishis. So to understand that, we have to go a bit slowly. So Upanishads very frequently refer to there's one thing, the thumb, of the size of the thumb, a light sort of flame of the size of the thumb, and also they speak of the dark cave of the heart, the cavity of the heart, where the buddhi is located. So in trying to understand the location of the self in the psychophysical system of a human being, we are open to different possibilities of spiritual life which we can explore. So time is over. I think the time is over. If there are some questions, you can ask. You can type it in the chat.
This consciousness, and that when it marked with the universal consciousness, it is Brahman. Universal consciousness is the Brahman. And in Gita, Sri Krishna says that I reside in every living being in their heart.
Exactly.
So it is the heart center where the consciousness is there.
That is what I was explaining. So the question is, what is the difference between the statement that when one realizes once the consciousness becomes one with the infinite consciousness, which is unlimited, and the limited consciousness which one feels in the heart, antaryami, that is known as inner controller. That's what we were discussing. You came a bit late. So this is the question. So what is the difference? These are different views from different standpoints. The Upanishads accept everything. It's a lower experience at different levels of experience of the same consciousness, which is reflected in the psychophysical system in different ways. For example, the consciousness of a doctor would be that when the heart stops or is declared brain dead, he can easily be satisfied if he says the consciousness of this person is unconscious, means dead. There's no consciousness. That is his idea of consciousness. But there are many other disciplines where the idea of consciousness has different connotations. So that is for a doctor, that is the consciousness is restricted to the body. When the body is he thinks physical consciousness is is everything, or maybe that is the main thing which is concerned with. But as you explore other possibilities, as you said in the Gita, the antaryami consciousness is a higher sort of consciousness where you feel that the self or the consciousness is reflected in this jivatma or the individual soul and is guiding all the activities. You got it? He still has the idea of body conscious, or has the consciousness that he's the body or he's the mind. So naturally that sense of ego at that level, that is also consciousness. But Sri Krishna gives this as a meditation. If you think that it is not you who are doing everything, but the supreme consciousness, who now is acting as a inner controller, he is controlling. Obviously, there's no inner or outer in the ultimate standpoint. When you merge, who is the inner controller and who is the outer? There's no inner outer in that. But since we are having that limited idea or reflected idea of consciousness, that's why Upanishad speaks of the reflections of the pure consciousness at different levels. So what we are seeing is reflected consciousness. And by this Gita verse, Sri Krishna is giving a technique of meditation, as the Upanishads also do. They also speak of different levels of consciousness, so that they become stepping stones to higher level of consciousness, which you have to explore.
But it lives in the center of
Yeah, it's definitely, that is what we are discussing. Because heart is a place, the spiritual heart is a place where we experience everything, the unified experience which we get from the different senses. It's a good point to begin. That's why they say you meditate in the heart. If you say all meditation, except for a few meditation techniques which may not advise you, especially the Advaitic techniques and all, but even there you will find they give a lot of importance to the spiritual heart. All traditions, somehow they come, the first experience of consciousness or buddhi is the spiritual heart is here. So that's why you see even your common gestures, when you want to say I, the small self, maybe it's a limited, you'll do like this, you won't do like this.
No.
You don't touch your head and say this is me. The experience is supposed to originate, the limited experience, from the center of the heart. That is the only reason. But then you see, Upanishads don't stop. It may start, the buddhi is often said to be situated at the space, there are different explanations, different Upanishads. They say in the cave, dark cavity of the heart. Dark cavity refers to the ignorance, actually. Dark cavity of the heart means our ignorance, including our academic achievements, and everything comes under the field of ignorance. Anything other than the truth perceived by buddhi is ignorance. So one may be an educated, ignorant person, another may be uneducated but still ignorant. So it doesn't really matter. In the level of manas, all are almost, it's most insignificant. That's why Latu Maharaj also could have the experience. And Swami Vivekananda was a university graduate, also had the same experience. So when it comes to the experience of buddhi, there is no distinction. It hardly matters whether one is a scholar or one is an illiterate person. That's why I said, na, Sri Ramakrishna's one of the greatest statements Swami Vivekananda has made in Sri Ramakrishna and Hinduism. That is a small booklet he wrote. He rarely wrote on his master, but in that he has given the gist. He said he deliberately shunned academic learning to show that intuitive spiritual truths can be experienced in the purified mind. That means buddhi. He could not use the word buddhi there. Because buddhi, very few people understand the distinction between buddhi and the mind. In the purified mind of the seers, just to prove that intuitive knowledge is not at all connected with secular knowledge or secular learning. So to show that, he says he deliberately shunned or deliberately discarded. Not that he could not, he was very good. When he learned the alphabet, he was very good in drawing, art and all. He could have easily learned, but he deliberately rejected it. Why? Because that was one of the missions of his life, to show what spiritual realization is and how it can be acquired by the development of buddhi, which is a totally different possibility that we explore in our... We have both. We have buddhi, we have manas, that is fine. A very sharp mind is very much necessary, because with that only Swami Vivekananda could discuss with others. But that doesn't mean Sri Ramakrishna was far more intelligent when it came to logical discussions. You see in the gospel, when Swami Vivekananda told him, Ki, this is blind faith, then he said, what do you mean by blind faith? Either say faith or say knowledge. There cannot be blind faith or faith with eyes. You see, this is such a logical thing. We don't realize. When you say, you have to be careful with words. When you say blind faith, faith is always blind because it is not based on your experience. It is based on your belief. It's a faith. But when you say blind faith, perhaps Swamiji wanted to convey something, that there are so many superstitions which are like, which he compared with blind faith. But Thakur immediately stopped him, said, what do you say? What do you mean by blind faith? Either say faith or say reason or buddhi, logical. Either you reason or you have faith. You can't have blind faith and faith. He said, I've never heard of faith with eyes. What do you mean by blind faith? So these things, see, these great truths which he uttered in the gospel, they have not come from the academic learning. Of course, he has heard a lot of, he says, I may not have gone to school, but I have heard many things. That is different. That is the examples that he gave, that this Upanishad Bhagavata says, that he heard. But experiences were his own. So that is the difference between the two. Okay. Any question?
There is one question from the question is, how do one recognize the buddhi? How to distinguish?
The question which has been asked in the chat online is how to recognize, distinguish between buddhi and manas. Oh, yes, it is very difficult. That's why I said there is the dividing line between the two is not very sharp. That's why otherwise we would have never made mistakes in our life. We often understand we cannot distinguish between our buddhi, that is intuitive choice-making capacity, and the choice-making capacity which we think is buddhi, which is a function of the mind, which is based on pure material or maybe trivial considerations. So there are many occasions when we think we have made the right choice, and that happens. That's why Viveka is such a difficult thing. So you cannot say that this is buddhi, this thought or this choice I have made because my buddhi has told me to do that. And we cannot say that sometimes we with a lot of analysis and thinking and planning and maybe studying the pros and cons of certain things, we take decisions. It's a very good. Swamiji, in fact, advised that before you develop the buddhi, it is better to rely on logic and reason, because that will help you. It's like a street cleaner. It will clean the street for you, but walking you can do only when the buddhi opens up or the buddhi is enlightened. So to distinguish that, one has to do spiritual practices. There is no other way. Because you can't intellectually analyze and say this is buddhi, this is. Then again you come back to the level of manas. So spiritual experience now, for example, for this you have to rely, for spiritual experiences or intuitive experiences, you have to rely on some accepted scriptural evidence, which is in Hinduism. Shankaracharya said, when somebody asked him, he says, a person who is logically far more advanced than me can defeat me in any argument, though I may be true. But he can convince me that what you said is wrong, because he's logically, his manas is far superior, far skilled, far better than me. So he can defeat me in an argument. That's what was happening. Buddhists and Hindus and Vedantins used to kill each other. I mean, there were competitions where whoever won either had to become a disciple or die. So these things were there. But Shankaracharya says intuition or the buddhi, when it reveals certain things, it becomes so self-evident, like Latu Maharaj, when you saw Adbhutananda. He saw it, that there was nothing in the world that could tell him that your experience was wrong. He was just waiting. So there the Shastra Pramana comes. See, when when that Swami Sudhir Maharaj, so Shuddhananda, when he said the Upanishad says, and that tallied with his experience. So Shankaracharya uses a word, logic is not the way. Logically, I can disprove anything. Just like a good lawyer can make a criminal look like an innocent person. That is because of the superior logic. Similarly, in spiritual matters, it is experience based on Shastra Pramana. Suppose I say something. Now, what are these Shastras? These are normally in the Hindu tradition, it is believed that the Upanishads and the Vedas are our Shastras. So, Latu Maharaj felt happy that the experience that he had, he didn't boast about it to other people. He saw something and he was convinced that what he saw was right and what he saw was intuitively correct. But when it coincided with the Shastras, with the Shastra Pramana, the Kathopanishad verse, then he jumped for joy because he could tally it. So that's the only way the spiritual experiences of the prophets, of the rishis, if it does not go contrary to that, that's the only safety check one need to do. First of all, it will give you a conviction. No spiritual experiences, real spiritual experience, which is a result of development of buddhi, it will remove all the doubts. That's one of the statements in the Kathopanishad, which says all your doubts will go. If you still doubt, that means the experience is not true. So one has to be, it's very difficult to define the veracity or the authenticity of any spiritual experience unless it is tallied with the scriptures or tallied with the experiences of other living persons who have experienced the same. So these are the two things which people who were fortunate when Sri Ramakrishna was alive, they could relate those experiences and Sri Ramakrishna could guide them and tell them whether these experiences were real, they were hallucinations. But that requires a person who has had all these experiences. When Swami Shardananji was asked, he was asked, how did you write all these wonderful experiences of the master unless you had these experiences yourself? It's a very legitimate question because it may be hearsay. Hriday and others from whom you have received this information, they might have told some cock and bull stories and you have just put it in the book. So he made a tremendous statement which adds or which confirms the authenticity of that book. And he very clearly said there is nothing in this book which I have written which does not tally, because he verified those experiences in his own life. And he said that happened with of course, it all happened with the grace of Holy Mother. So when Ma Sharda Devi passed away, he could not write anything further. Though they pressurized him, he said, no, my power has gone. I can't write. He could not finish the Great Master. So when he wrote the Great Master, by the grace of Holy, in the introduction, he says, by whose grace he knew that these experiences were, though he did not make much publicity. So Swami Shardanji says, nothing which is beyond or which is not experienced by me has been recorded in this. So after that, the disciples just kept quiet, because they knew the experiences cover a vast range of experiences, spiritual experiences, which maybe after Thakur somebody claimed that he had. So that is there. One is the doubt totally vanishes, and second, it should be verified by Shastra Pramana. Shastra Pramana means scriptural evidence. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.